Hey guys, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Becca and today we are going to be talking about the series that I DNF'd, finished and I'm up to date on as of 2019, as well as the series I am continuing on with in 2020. So pretty soon you will also get my 2019 stats wrap up, and when you see that video you will notice that I predominantly read books in series. I've talked at length about how I only really build attachment to characters and plots if I am reading a book in a series. Now we do have 40 different book series to talk about today, but do not worry because I actually did a mid-year series check-in at around the beginning of July, and I'm going to link that video up here for you guys if you would like to check that out, because the series that I mentioned in that video I am just going to briefly mention in this one, because as you can imagine 40 book series is a lot to talk about, and honestly I don't really fancy making a 2-hour long video today. So this video is going to be split up into 5 different sections. The first one is series that I DNF'd in 2019. The second is completed series that I have finished. The third will be series that I'm currently up to date on with no books currently announced to be released in 2020. The fourth will be series that I was up to date on as of 2019 that have releases coming in 2020. And the final and largest section will be the series that I have started and have not finished and will hopefully be continuing on with in 2020. So as you can see, we do have a lot to cover in this video, so I'm going to get into it, starting with the 2 series that I actually DNF'd in 2019. Both of these I did mention in the mid-year series check-in, so I am just going to mention these 2 series briefly, and if you would like any more information about these series or why I DNF'd them, then you can check out that video I made midway through 2019. So the first series that I DNF'd was the Giver Quartet by Lois Lowry. I read 3 books in this series, started the 4th, and realised that I just couldn't hack it anymore. And then the other series that I DNF'd was the Orders of Darkness series by Philippa Gregory. I only read the first book in this series, which was Changeling, and this book actually made it to my worst books of 2019, which explains why I won't be continuing. Now for the series that I finished in 2019, there are 6 of these. These are entirely completed series. All of the books have been published and I have read them all. The first 3 I did mention in that mid-year check-in, and they are Rebel of the Sands by Alwyn Hamilton, which is a young adult desert fantasy, To All the Boys I've Loved Before by Jenny Han, which is a young adult contemporary series, and the Wayfarers series by Becky Chambers, the first book being The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, which made it to my best of 2019 video. So in the second half of 2019 I did complete the Nevernight Chronicle by Jay Kristoff. This is one of my favourite series of all time. I actually read the entire series in 2019 because I did reread both Nevernight and God's Grave before going into Dark Dawn, which was the final book in the trilogy and my most anticipated release of last year. So the Nevernight series is an adult grimdark series that follows 16-year-old Mia Corvair, who as a child watched her father hanged for treason and her mother imprisoned. She managed to escape and was taken in by an old man who owns a curio shop, who then prepared her for entry into the Red Church, which is a notorious group of assassins. The first 2 books in this series did not make it into my best of 2019 video as they were rereads, but the third very much did. You guys know Jay Kristoff is my favourite author. I love what he does with stories. I love how meta he can be. I really love his characters and the dialogue between them, and I really like how he can blend modern relatable stories and modern humour with a archaic fantasy type setting without making it jarring and pulling you out of the story. And as this is one of my favourite series of all time, I did give every book in this series 5 stars. Next up we have The Arc of a Scythe by Neil Shusterman. This is a series that I actually started and finished in 2019. I read the entire thing. This is a young adult utopian series that takes place in a world where humanity has conquered death, and in this series we follow Citra and Rowan, who are apprentice scythes who are being trained to fulfill the important task of gleaning people, because while humanity has conquered death, population control is still an issue and the scythedom are charged with maintaining a reasonable population. So the final book in this series, The Toll, was released in 2019 and I would say is my second most anticipated release of last year. I did not love that book as much as the first 2 books in this series. I gave both Scythe and Thunderhead 5 stars and The Toll 4 stars. However, I still think that this will be one of my favourite series overall because I do really love the world in this, and I know a lot of people were disappointed with the last book in in the series. I didn't mind it too much. There were a lot of aspects in there that I really liked. For me, it felt like it had something a little bit missing that the first and second books did have, but regardless, I still think that this will also be one of my favorite series of all time. And the last series that I completed in 2019 was the Grisha trilogy by Leigh Bardugo. Myself and Jade from JD Ray Reads have been buddy reading the entire Grishaverse. We really need to get on with carrying on with our read actually, but the Grisha trilogy was a reread for me. This is a series that I read quite a few years ago and I wanted to revisit before I headed into Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom. This is a young adult fantasy series that follows Lena, who is a soldier who has been drafted into the Ravkan army. The country of Ravka is bisected by this huge shadowy area called the Fold, which is full of demons. People do regularly cross the Fold to get valuable supplies from the other side, and one day when Alina is crossing, it is revealed that she has these powers that nobody else in the world does, and from there she's whisked away to the Grisha Academy to hone these abilities. I would say that this is around a 4-star series for me. My favourite book is the second book, Siege and Storm, as that is the introduction point for one of my favourite fictional characters of all time, Nikolai. I wasn't sure if I would like this series when rereading it because a lot of people find it very tropey, and with it being released quite a few years ago, it's a little bit dated, but I found that for me this trilogy still does stand up if you do take into account that it was published quite a few years ago, so it does contain a lot of the things that aren't in young adult now that were very popular then. In 2019 I did catch up on 2 book series that are currently unfinished but have no release dates in 2020 for the coming books. One of them I have mentioned in that previous video, and that is You by Caroline Kepnes, which is once again in my best books of 2019. I have read the 2 currently published books in this series. I believe it's going to be a 4-book series. There is no current release date for book 3 in this series. However, I have heard that Caroline Kepnes has actually just finished book 3, so there is a possibility it will be published in 2020. I'm pretty sure you guys will be able to guess what the other series is, but that is A Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin. This is an epic adult high fantasy series. It is the series of books that Game of Thrones is based on, and while we have a lot of plot threads in here, the bulk of the published books in this series so far are about the most powerful families in the country of Westeros fighting over the Iron Throne. In 2019 I hosted a read along for all of the books published so far in this series, of which there are 5 in total. Clash of Kings would be my least favourite in the series, and for my favourites it's probably tied between the first book, A Game of Thrones, and the last book, A Dance with Dragons. But as a fan of the TV show, I am very glad that I actually managed to read this series because there's a lot of information like mythology and legend of the world contained in these books that you don't see in the show, and by the time you get to where the series is up to, A Dance with Dragons, the plot lines are diverging a great deal from what happened in the show. So I'm very excited for the Winds of Winter whenever that may be published so that I can see where the series goes from there. I then have 6 series that I am up to date on as of the end of 2019, but all of these series do have the next book due to release in 2020. The first 2 of these I have previously mentioned, the first one being In the Kindness of Magicians by Kat Howard. This was originally published as a standalone, however it has since been made into a series, and I believe that the sequel, A Sleight of Shadows, will be released at some point this year. The second one is Something Dark and Holy by Emily A. Duncan, the first book being Wicked Saints, and the second being the currently unreleased Ruthless Gods. We then have Frostheart by Jamie Littler, which is the first book in a children's series. At this moment I'm not sure how many books are going to be in this series, but the second book will be released in 2020, and this is a snowy fantasy children's book who follows a boy who lives in this snowy landscape where there are monsters that live in the snow. Our main character Ash finds out that he is a song weaver, which means that he has the ability to communicate with the monsters, which causes the people of his community to fear him, as they think that the monsters will then be able to persuade Ash to work against them. Because of this, Ash ends up joining the crew of a snow sleigh called the Frostheart, and from there he begins the mission of hunting down his parents who left him behind a long time ago and are now thought missing. So I really enjoyed this book. It isn't my favourite children's book that I read in 2019, but I did think that it was very heartwarming. I read this because it was the group book for Believathon, which is a month-long readathon hosted by my good friend Gavin from How to Train Your Gavin, and focuses solely on reading children's literature. This is also currently Gavin's favourite children's book, so I knew that I had to read it, and I'm excited to see where the sequel will take this story. We then have The Merciful Crow by Margaret Owen. The sequel will be called The Faithless Hawk, and this is a young adult fantasy series that takes place in a world with a caste system that is all named after birds. Our main character is a crow, and she is right at the bottom of the pile, and as a crow her job is to remove the bodies of people who have died by the plague and give them a burial, as the crow caste are mysteriously immune to the plague. One day the crows are tasked on removing 2 bodies from the palace, only to find out that those 2 people are not actually dead dead, and it is the Crown Prince and his bodyguard who pretended to die of the plague so they could escape the palace, as the prince feared assassination. I actually really enjoyed this book. There are not many people who did. I thought that this was a good, complex young adult fantasy that had some really great world building, a complex magic and political system, and also a really compelling romance. I'm a little bit nervous that the sequel to this is called The Faithless Hawk, and if you have read this, you will know why that makes me nervous. But to be honest, I think that that title is just making me really anticipate the sequel more. We then have The Beckoning Shadow by Catherine Blair. This is a young adult fantasy that is kind of superhero-esque. In this, we follow a main character called Vesper who has the power to manifest other people's fears into reality. In this world, people like Vesper are called oddities and hunted down. One day, when Vesper accidentally uses her powers in a way that hurts her family, she runs away and finds a group of people who are more like herself, and quickly finds out that there is soon going to be a tournament where the prize will be $1 million and the chance to unwrite something from history. Vesper jumps at this because she very much wants to undo the thing that she did to her family, and so we follow her as she goes through this tournament, both honing her magical ability and also physical fighting skills at the hands of former MMA fighter Sam. This was a 2019 debut. I didn't expect much from it when I went into it, but I did very much enjoy it. I think the main selling point of this series for me is that it is just so compelling. Once again, absolutely love the romance, and I'm very excited to see where the sequel will be taking this one. And the last series for this section is Heartstopper by Alice Oseman. This is a young adult contemporary webcomic that follows two boys. One is openly gay, and at the start of this series the other one believes that he is straight. However, when they meet, the one that thinks that he is straight soon starts questioning his sexuality as he feels drawn to this boy. So I have read the first two published volumes in this webcomic. However, as it is a webcomic, it is available to read online for free. So while the third volume will be published soon, it is already all available online, so I could go and read it if I wanted to. While I do actually read this series in webcomic form online, I like to keep in track with the published volumes, as the very small installments in this series are published almost weekly, I think, and I hate the fact of reading it exclusively online and getting to a cliffhanger and having to wait weeks for the next section. So the way I've been reading this series is when the volume is published, I go into the webcomic, read everything that's contained in that published volume, and then stop and wait for the next volume. So for the final section of this video, we will be talking about the series that I have started and have not finished, and will be carrying forward to 2020. 24 series that fall into this category, and I am ashamed of myself because I never used to be that person that doesn't finish a series that I have started. So by the end of 2020, I want to have significantly reduced that amount, and I want to be bringing you a huge list of series that I have actually finished. But at the moment, sadly, that is not the case. So first off, I will run through the 11 series I have open that I have actually not made any progress on at all since that video I made in July. First up, we have Rat Queens by Curtis J. Weeb and Rock Upchurch. This is an adult fantasy graphic novel series, and I have currently read 2 volumes. The DC Icon series by a range of popular young adult authors. This is a young adult fantasy series that comprises of superhero and anti-hero stories, all written by different authors. I have currently read 2 out of the 4 books in this series. The Wolves of Mercy Falls series by Maggie Stiefvater. This is a young adult paranormal series, and I have completed the core trilogy, but I still need to read the spin-off Sinner. The Lotus War series by Jay Kristoff. This is an adult East Asian inspired fantasy. I have read the first 2 books in this series, but I have decided that before finishing the series, I'm going to go back and reread it. Not because I need to, but just because I really love Jay Kristoff and I want to. Harry Potter by J.K. Rowling. In 2019, I reread the first 4 books in this series. In 2020, I hope to continue and reread the last 3. The Poppy War by R.F. Kong. I actually don't own The Poppy War. I won The Dragon Republic, which is the second book in a giveaway. This is an adult grimdark fantasy series. I've read The Poppy War. I haven't read The Dragon Republic, and the 3rd book will be published in 2020. Isola by Brendan Fletcher and Carl Kerschel. This is an adult fantasy graphic novel series. I have only read volume 1. I believe volume 2 has just been released, and assumedly the series will also continue. The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. This is a young adult dystopian. I did start rereading the series. I only managed to reread The Hunger Games. I was just going to not bother rereading the rest, but there is a prequel book coming in 2020, so because of that, I do actually want to continue and finish my reread of this series before before the release of the prequel. Girls of Paper and Fire by Natasha Nyon. I have still only read the first book. I do own the second and haven't got to it yet, and I believe that the final book will be released this year. The Witcher series by Andrzej Sapkowski. This is an adult fantasy series. The first book is actually The Last Wish, but I've been picking these up secondhand and don't own the first book yet. I didn't really love the first book because it was a collection of short stories, and so is the second, but I am persevering to get to the core books in the series. Gossip Girl by Cecily von Ziegersart. This is a young adult contemporary series, and I have still only read the first book. So the next 7 series that I'm going to be talking about are ones that I did mention in that previous video, but I have made progress on them since then. The first one of those is the Confessions of Georgia Nicholson series by Louise Renison. This is a young adult contemporary series. I am rereading the first 9 books in this series, and then I will be reading the final book for the first time. I'm currently 7 books into this, and I would very much like to finish this in 2020. Then we have the Sucky Stackhouse series by Charlene Harris. The first book in this series did actually make it into my worst books of 2019 video. However, I do like to occasionally read a book in this series as a palate cleanser. This is an adult paranormal romance series, and I am currently 4 books in. We then have the Wayward Children series by Shauna Maguire. This is an adult portal fantasy series comprised of novellas. I have been getting these books out from my library. I think that the 5th book in this series has just been published in the last few weeks, and I have currently read 3 books. We then have Children of the Whales by Abby Umeda. This is a fantasy manga series, and I have currently read 3 volumes. Next up is the Land of Ingery series by Diana Wynne Jones, the first book of which is Howl's Moving Castle, which was one of my best books of 2019. This is a children's fantasy series that I'm really coming to love, and I have currently read 2 out of the 3 published books. Orange by Ichigo Takano. This is a young adult contemporary manga series with some sci-fi elements. I have read the core series of this, which is comprised of 2 volumes of similar size. However, I do still have to read Orange Future, which I believe is a short story that is set a few years in the future of the bulk of the series. The Umbrella Academy by Gerard Way and Gabriel Barr. I think this was in my most disappointing books of 2019 list. Since making that previous video, I have read 1 more volume in this series, but there was a 3rd volume published in 2019. I do actually think I'm going to be unhauling the 2 books in this series, but my friend Ryan is also unhauling this series, and he does own the 3rd volume, so he will be giving me the 3rd volume so that I can read it. But I don't really like this series very much, so I may leave it at that 3rd volume. And then finally, the final 6 series we are going to be talking about today are ones that I have started in the second half of 2019. The first one of those is the Illuminate Files by Jay Kristoff and Amy Kaufman. This is a young adult science fiction series that follows 2 teenagers who have just broken up when their planet is attacked due to some mining operations that have been running on there. Both Katie and Ezra do manage to evacuate, and they end up on a fleet of spaceships. However, the survival fleet is heavily damaged and is unable to move through space very quickly, and they are being pursued by one of the warships that attacked their planet. I have currently read Illuminate and Gemina, which are the first 2 books in this series. I really love this series. Illuminate was one of my favorite books of 2019, and I currently have Obsidio on my January TBR. So fingers crossed I will be completing this one very soon, because it is one that I wanted to have finished before the end of the year. We then have Legion by Brandon Sanderson, which is a series of adult paranormal novellas that follow a detective who has many different voices in his head that he uses to solve crimes. So an example of this is that he will have one who is very good at telling if people can tell the truth, and if he needs to use that in an investigation, he brings out this entity or alternative personality to help him solve his case. I read the first novella in this series. I really enjoyed it. Not sure when I'm going to continue, because the only reason I read the first one is because it was included in a bind up with an Elantris novella, but I did enjoy what I read and would like to continue at some point. Then we have the Six of Crows duology by Leigh Bardugo. As I said earlier in this video, Jade and myself have been buddy reading the entire Grishaverse. However, I think we read Six of Crows in like September and have yet to continue. I'm sure you guys know what this series is because it is well loved, but this is a young adult fantasy series that follow 6 thieves led by Kaz Brecker, who are tasked with performing an impossible heist to break out the inventor of a very dangerous drug from this high security prison. I did not love this as much as I expected to based on how much everybody else loves it, but I do really love some of the characters in here, and I'm excited to see how the duology concludes. That being said, I do believe that there is some tentative plans for a 3rd book in this series being published over the next few years. We now have a couple of series that I started for Believathon, the first being Mary Poppins by P.L. Travers, which is a classic children's series that follows the magical nanny Mary Poppins as she transforms the lives of the Banks children. Really enjoyed this. I'm a huge fan of Mary Poppins as a character, and I really love the original Disney movie. I wasn't sure when I originally bought this whether I was going to be carrying on with the series, but I think that the Disney movie perfectly encapsulated the character of Mary Poppins, so I really want to see what she gets up to in the later series. I also have His Dark Materials by Philip Pullman. I have only read the first book, which is Northern Lights. This is a fantasy series that follows Lyra, who is an orphan that has been left by her uncle at Jordan College in Oxford as kind of a ward situation. Lyra is very mischievous and adventurous, so when Lyra's friend is taken by the Gobblers shortly after she has eavesdropped on a presentation her uncle was giving to the masters of the college about a mysterious substance called dust, Lyra starts to think that the two things may be connected and begins an expedition to the north to figure out what's going on and find her lost friend. This is often referred to as a children's series, and it is. However, this is a series that has no set age range, so people of any age could read this series and really enjoy it because it has a really good mix of children's adventure story and adult high fantasy complexity. And the last series of this video is The Bone Season by Samantha Shannon. This is an adult dystopian series that takes place in a futuristic London where clairvoyancy is illegal. We follow our main character Paige, who is a clairvoyant and is also second in command for one of the most influential London gangs. One day Paige is caught using her clairvoyant abilities and she is captured and taken away, assumedly to be hanged. However, where she is actually taken opens the whole world of this series up, and we then have supernatural creatures and like whole new plot developments. So this series is actually a reread for me. When rereading this, I did actually reread the first 3 books in this series, but as of the end of 2019 I had only reread 2, and as well as that, the 4th book in this series is scheduled to be released in 2020, so then I will have yet another book to read in this series to catch up. So those are all of the series that I have made progress on, DNF'd, etc. in 2019. There were a lot of them. I read a lot of series. I think one of my main goals of 2020 is going to be to whittle through some of these, even if it includes DNF in some of them, because I'm not the kind of person, I say this, but clearly I am. I'm not the kind of person who has series unfinished. I used to be really good at pretty much binge reading a series with very few books in between until I started BookTube, so that is something that I definitely need to get back to. So that is about it for this video, so please don't forget to like if you liked it and subscribe if you want to. If you head into my description box, you'll find a link to my Goodreads, Instagram and Twitter if you'd like to follow me on any of those, as well as a link to my Bookish body butter and candle website, the Instagram for that, and 10% off discount code. So that's it from me today, guys. Bye!
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you'll go where nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.